I'm not against the game element of interactive fiction per se. It's not where my interests lie. And, well, by game element, I mean we're talking about puzzles and sort of pitting your wits against the designer of the game. Is basically what's happening there. And it's not because I feel dismissive of it. Mainly, I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at solving them, and I'm not very good at coming up with them. So what I kind of wanted to do was, I was shooting in a slightly different direction, and as I was developing Anchorhead, I started to reconceptualize puzzles as valves and gateways to make the story happen. Well, I probably wouldn't particularly enjoy playing another Zork now, just because, you know, interests have kind of moved on, and I'm expecting other things from any game that I'm playing. But the idea of it is still neat. I mean, there's a certain respect for it as sort of the very first, real exposure to that. Yeah. Anchorhead hit the 512K limit. I think it is. It's the virtual machine, the Z machine that Inform games run on. Has a limit to the amount of stuff that you can cram in there, and there's tricks and shortcuts, but eventually you're just going to hit the ceiling. And at the time that frustrated me. The reason why it was there was, I think there's a lot of, programmers are developing it, and there's programmers' aesthetics of compactness, of portability, being able to play this on your, Unix box or your, TI-99 4A. But I've never been a programmer, and I didn't really have any investment in that sort of thing for the Z machine. And so my question was, I don't want to write for some guy's TI-99 4A. I want to write this as big as it needs to be, and you couldn't do it. Now we have Glux, we have Inform 7, and it's a lot easier to just build those things as big as you can possibly get them. But at the time, it seemed pretty arbitrary, coming from a different set of aesthetic rules. Not being involved in the actual creation of the programming of the virtual machine. Writer first. I taught myself how to program Inform 6, and I've taught myself to program a few other things, but I'm by no means a programmer. Most of that stuff is beyond me. I learned how to do it. I learned how to code, as much as I need to make the words come out on the screen the way they're supposed to. Narrative is a change in your situation over time, and the important thing about that is you can't go backwards. When something changes, that's a new way to look at the game. When you get to the second chapter or the third chapter, and now this is happening in the town that wasn't before, and your situation has changed. And so puzzles were not so much there to be challenging as they were to, once you figure out how to get through this door or through this into this next room, that's a valve, that's a gateway. It lets you through into the next part of the story. Or if there's several branches, it lets you into this branch as opposed to that branch, and then it keeps you from going back. Whereas, with Zork, with the Zork-like game, there's not really a story. There's just an open space, and then there's elements in it that you shift around, and you shift them around very freely until the game's solved or you give up. With a game where you're trying to create a narrative, there's a push. You're trying to push the player into in a certain direction, and keep pushing and nudging and gently hurting until the player reaches the end. Well, I started out just wanting to write a text adventure game, any text adventure game. ever since Zork, the idea of creating one on my own was a big deal. I wanted to try that out, and I think the decision to write a game came first, and then groping around for some subject matter. The Lovecraftian genre came next, and then from there it was coming up with scenes that I wanted to see in it, and then coming up with a way to fit all those scenes in there, and then binding it all together with a plot and making it all make sense. So it started with wanting to make a text adventure game, and then the story grew from there. I couldn't say that I actually had the idea for the story and then was shopping around for a medium. It kind of went the other way around. She was aware of it. She likes the idea of it, but actually sitting down in front of a computer and puzzling through and typing commands isn't something that she finds particularly relaxing or enjoyable. And she would try it, and she'd stop at a puzzle, and then she'd turn it off and say, "I'm not quitting. I just want to think about this puzzle for a while, and I'll come back to it." And then she wouldn't come back to it for months and months, and I didn't want to bug her about it. I didn't want her to learn to hate it because I kept pestering her about it. But finally, after a few years, I said, "You've never played this game. You've never read this thing that I kind of wrote for you. So here's the deal. You're going to sit down and play it because I know that you enjoy reading it. But you're going to let me give you hints. If you get stuck, you have to ask for a hint right away, and I'm going to give it to you. And we'll just keep on going like that because the sticker here is that every time you get stuck, the game goes away."
So this is just kind of like bowling or going out for poker. It's just he goes out for a while and works on his thing.
It's a kind of writing, and Rami has always been very supportive and happy about my writing, and she likes to read what I write. But with the game, it's not as straightforward. You can't just sit down and read what I write. You have to figure it out. And so I had to give her that little extra incentive to sit down and figure it out. I get very detail-oriented, and part of the reason why I ran up against the big limit is because there was nothing I wouldn't describe, which is probably a mistake that experienced designers would warn you against. To learn to design towards an economy of objects, but at the time, there was nothing I wouldn't describe. If I mentioned wet leaves on the concrete, then we have an object for wet leaves and an object for concrete, and it just balloons to hundreds and hundreds of objects that have no purpose except to just be looked at and provide a little description. But the end result is a pretty dense and richly textured world that people were able to get lost in.
Well, was that your intention with it?
Very visually oriented, and so anything that I could see in my mind's eye about a scene, I wanted to be seen in text. In the years since, I've kind of come to a slightly different attitude towards it, which is to be more vague, but or not vague, but just to create a space where the reader's imagination fills in, rather than trying to cram every little detail into it and providing descriptions for dozens and dozens of objects. Put more effort into suggesting and inferring, and that lets. I think ultimately that makes it has the ability to make it even more vivid if you do it well, and it's easier to program because there's not as much stuff. Plotkin, I think, Plotkin is brilliant. He's got a mind. He's got a weird mind that I really enjoy. I've also really enjoyed, Emily Short, Adam Cadre, and some of the others. Although I have to admit it, at this point I don't register the names as much. I like the games that try to do something different with story and with the way that the story gets presented to you in the medium. It's one of the things I've always enjoyed about Adam Cadre's games. It's a shame he hasn't done anything in a while, but 915 is a great example. It's just a tiny little game, and it plays off the sort of cliched opening of a start off in your apartment sort of game. But the entire story rests on the initial assumptions that a player of interactive fiction is going to make opening up this game, and the big punchline, that's why it works, is because you have expectations about how IF stories work, and all of them do that. Shrapnel plays around with the concept of restoring, restarting. I've forgotten the name of it. Varicella, that's what I'm thinking of. Varicella is another one where your protagonist is explicitly portrayed as a separate person from you, the player, and his thought processes are not the same as your thought processes trying to figure out the puzzle. And you enter the story at a point where the protagonist has already figured out the entire solution, but the protagonist isn't talking to you. You're acting through him, and you're not privy to his thoughts. So the conceit of that game is you're trying to figure out what he has already thought of in order to solve the situation that he's in. And I enjoy that. I like finding ways that interactive fiction can tell a story in a way that a static story can't tell the same story. It was fascinating to see it, that it would, understand English, or what I thought was understanding English. And you hit the wall of that pretty fast. But the concept of actually talking to the computer, and this was back, with Tron and the early '80s, computers were actually becoming visible, and the idea of talking to your computer, or carrying on a conversation with it, or getting lost in a world with your computer was a big part of my imagination back then. Just opening up this, the space of Zork, the geography of Zork, and being able to access this space through talking to the computer was really just kind of brilliant to me. What's interesting about Inform 7 is that Inform 7 is not really the language anymore. It's the entire design development. What I find impressive about it is that it gathers all the disparate elements of creating and playing interactive fiction into one package. Your text editor, your compiler, your interpreter, and puts it in a user interface, and puts it under a user interface that's nice to look at and easy to use, and says, here, create games with this. And it gets it away from previously the tools for creating interactive fiction games were very much it was very much a programmer's paradigm. You have all these little minimal interface bits and pieces that you put together in the command line, and you have to do a lot of studying and practice to get it working if you're not already from a programming background. And what Inform now is a one-touch application where you just download it, you start it up, and you just start working on it. Whether your game works or not is all about you. It's not about all the different pieces that you're trying to pull together and make work together. It's just the one piece. So I think it's an Inform is interactive fiction design tools aimed not at programmers but at users.